my friends. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Vanessa, and I am so excited to be here with you today and have one of my dear friends and favorite now authors, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. She just wrote this incredible book, Forever Strong, a new science-based strategy for aging well. And it is my new Bible on protein nutrition, and so much more. This book has everything in it. I'm going to be gifting it to everyone that I know, and you have to go out and get your copy. We talk all about some of the main topics in the book today, and I think you will find it to be such powerful information: how to build muscle, lose fat, feel satiated all the time from your nutrition, how to really optimize your body composition, because there are so many connections to brain health, overall health, metabolic health, to enhancing our glucose disposal, and so much more. We really dive in depth on key topics today, and we also talk a lot about women specifically in peri and postmenopause, what her recommendations are to really enhance body composition and set ourselves up to really age well. And we talk about so many fascinating topics, including intermittent fasting, whether or not she recommends OMAD or one meal a day, what she does recommend when it comes to carbs per meal, thresholds. There's a threshold for carbs at a meal, how much protein, carb, and fat we should be targeting for optimal health and wellness, or dosing, as she puts it. I know you're going to get so much from this episode. I can't wait for you to hear it. I can't wait to chat with you more about it in our Facebook group, which is the Optimal Protein Podcast on Facebook. And can't wait for you to let me know your thoughts on the episode, what your top highlights or takeaways were. Tag myself and Gabrielle in your stories, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon on Instagram, and let us know if you picked up a copy of the book or what your insights or takeaways were from this episode. I am so excited for you all to hear this episode with Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. She is the founder of the concept of muscle-centric medicine. She is board certified in family medicine, and she completed a combined research and clinical fellowship in geriatrics and nutritional sciences at Washington University. She did her undergrad training in nutritional sciences at the University of Illinois. And she is a subject matter expert and educator in the practical application of protein types and levels for health, performance, aging, and disease prevention. She is so passionate about this topic. Her passion is contagious, and I know you all are going to love this episode. Now, before we jump into today's episode, I want to take a really quick moment to tell you about the brand new second generation of the Tone device, which I am about to launch. Welcome to the Tone device, the newest breath ketone analyzer by Ketogenic Girl. With the Tone device, you can instantly know if you are burning body fat. You can say goodbye to expensive, painful ketone testing. With the Tone device, you simply breathe into the device and you will get an instant reading, letting you know if you are burning fat or in the fat burning zone. With the Tone device, you can now more easily and effectively reach your fitness goals using the feedback that it provides. Welcome to the Tone device. Welcome to unlimited testing. Buy yours today and get in the fat burning zone. Now, without further ado, let's get into today's episode. All right. Well, Gabrielle, Dr. Lyon, thank you so much for being back here on the Optimal Protein Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's so fun to see you. We have so much in common. And in full disclosure, you are a friend and you've just been such a huge supporter. I'm so happy to be chatting with you.
I feel the same way about you, and you're so supportive of all of your friends and the people that you care about. And you manage to maintain like quite a large circle, which is really impressive, of amazing people. But I know you just attract amazing people because of who you are. And I'm just so happy to be sitting down here with you again to talk about your incredible new book. I had to text you while I was reading it because I was like, I'm crying and I'm like walking
Aw.
outside because I'm just reading these. It was so much more than I expected. And my bar was already pretty high. So you must tell me, at least how do you feel about it? Like, you must feel pretty good about it.
I feel that this book has the possibility of changing the narrative of how we think about health and wellness. And it's interesting as this book comes closer to launch, which it's out on Tuesday. This may be already out by then, October 17th, is that this book is so much bigger than any one person. The messaging behind this book is about shifting the paradigm of medicine from what we have to lose, like obesity, to what we have to gain, which is skeletal muscle, and shifting the concept that we have the capacity to take health and wellness into our own hands, and to do it, most importantly, from an evidence-based perspective.
Yes.
One that allows to mitigate chaos, to know exactly what to do, how to do it, when to execute, and why.
I mean, the book is flawless. Like, you just talked about, I think my favorite part of it is how much you talked about quality research and what that is, and how much we have to back up everything that you're saying in it. You also talked about mindset, which blew my mind. And you even talked about The Big Leap, which is one of my favorite books.
Yes.
You could really like
Yeah.
put everything in there, and the upper limit problem. And so I think it's just going to provide so much more than what people even expect from it. Like, they'll already be expecting a lot. There's just so much more to it. Now, when you were researching the book, because I know you did so much research for this, in addition to all the knowledge that you already have on this topic, what was the thing that surprised you the most in all the research that you did? Because I imagine it was substantial.
The overarching theme that I discovered was really how behind the times we were, how limited the actual research was as it relates to changing the paradigm of thinking. And I'm going to explain what that means. When I was looking at all the data for skeletal muscle, for you guys listening and who don't know me, again, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, and I developed this concept of medicine called muscle-centric medicine. And in order to be a good physician, you have to go back and you have to get a good framework. You have to get a solid evidence-based knowledge foundation, which I know that you can appreciate. And when you think about a collective body of research, you have to understand that the questions that are being asked, we expect an appropriate answer. And here's what I'm going to get to the point. We have constantly been talking about body fat.
Mm.
Now we are moving to skeletal muscle. The way in which people measure body fat is through a DEXA. That is the standard way, whether, most people cannot get an MRI or a CT. It is DEXA. All skeletal muscle, the majority of all skeletal muscle research is all extrapolation data, which is insane.
Yeah.
DEXA does not directly measure skeletal muscle mass. We have a large body of evidence that is underestimating the importance of skeletal muscle. And that was so shocking. There are new developments coming out, but that it's just, they're not mainstream, nor are they common. And it's called, for example, D3 creatine. And that's a deuterated creatine, which means you take a pill, it tags skeletal muscle, so you know exactly how much skeletal muscle mass you have. And the
Amazing.
result of that research is that we've actually underestimated the importance of skeletal muscle. The book is full of highlighting the importance. And when you go even a layer deeper, much of the literature, for example, right now we always talk about strength. Strength matters more than muscle mass. From a cognitive perspective, that doesn't really make sense. The amount of muscle mass you have is equally as important. And I'm saying that maybe it's not equally, but I believe that it's equally as important. And one of the reasons that we've been focused so much on strength, which is critical, and less in mass in the research, is because they haven't been measuring skeletal muscle mass directly. And the newer research started around 2018. This is by William Evans. As you begin to measure skeletal muscle mass directly, we see that the mass in and of itself is also nearly as critical as strength. In addition to that statement, it is the loss of skeletal muscle mass that has more negative outcomes rather than the gain of body fat. This brings me back to the question that you asked originally. What was the most striking thing? The most striking thing was the disservice that we have done skeletal muscle mass as an organ system.
And yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it is really, we really are in the sort of the dark ages when it comes to how we are interpreting metabolic health and body composition. Just even today, most physicians are still using BMI, which makes no sense for anyone who lifts weights. Most people will come up as obese if they have a lot of lean body mass based on that. And I just think that using the scale, which most people are using as well, is really not helpful for people to be measuring their progress. Like countless times I've worked with clients who are, upping their protein and then they're gaining weight on the scale. And if it wasn't for at least DEXA, they would totally give up because they would think that they're gaining fat when they're actually gaining muscle. I just can't wait till we get to the point where you go into a physician's office and they're like, what's your muscle mass? Like, let's look at your muscle mass. Because at the end of the day, if you have a lot of muscle mass and you also have, a little extra fat mass, it's fine, right? Like as long as it's the muscle mass, like you're saying, that is the most key.
Yeah. And again, that was the most shocking portion of the research. Because again, I have taken for granted that I've trained under one of the world leading experts of protein metabolism and muscle. And that's who this book is dedicated to, Don Layman. It was striking, but we're changing that.
Yes.
Vanessa, we are changing that. We're going to change the paradigm of how muscle is looked at as an endocrine organ. Not only that, it will be amazing when skeletal muscle is considered a vital sign.
Yes. Yes.
Just as important as blood pressure, just as important as heart rate.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. Now, when it comes to some of the statistics and numbers that you had in the book, you had some excellent ones. And again, a testament to all the research that you did. Now, what was some of the data that you saw when there were correlations between obesity and being undermuscled with the effects on the brain and effects on our bodies that, people may not be so aware of?
Yeah. Well, what you're speaking to is, and actually this was some of the research that I did in my fellowship, looking at body composition and brain function. And the literature is clear that obesity is a risk factor for cognitive decline and Alzheimer's. And one of the reasons is that the brain is sensitive to insulin and sensitive to metabolic parameters that change in the body, meaning if you have elevated levels of glucose, elevated levels of insulin, the metabolic dysfunction in the body, the brain in and of itself, obviously, is an organ. And what we see in the literature over time is the wider the waistline, the poorer the body composition, the higher the body fat, the lower brain volume can be. And the brain, Alzheimer's can be thought of in part as type 3 diabetes of the brain. Yes. Which brings us back to this idea that skeletal muscle is the pinnacle. Skeletal muscle is the pinnacle of health and wellness, because these diseases like Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease, obesity, diabetes, they're not out there. What does that mean? They are not the root cause. The root cause is unhealthy skeletal muscle decades before we see development of cardiovascular disease, decades before we see the development of cognitive impairment. Oftentimes, people believe that these are things that just happen with aging. But quite frankly, there's evidence to suggest that skeletal muscle insulin resistance, which is the focal point, which is where the dysfunction begins, happens. It is shown in 18-year-old, quote, healthy sedentary individuals. The early kind of hallmark studies came out of Yale on 18-year-old college students with no outward signs of excess body fat.
Wow. That's very early onset.
That's the power, right? And the power of this message is that early intervention by shifting the focus away from losing weight. When was the last time you went to a doctor and the doctor said, you need to gain skeletal muscle? You don't. You go to your doctor and they say you need to lose weight.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be over X, Y, and Z. That's like putting the chicken before the egg.
Right.
Because at the root cause of that is unhealthy skeletal muscle first, or not enough skeletal muscle first.
Right. And aside from all those benefits on the brain and everything that you just mentioned, obviously people are aware of the fact that the more muscle or lean body mass that you have, the more glucose disposal you have. You talked in the book about, the independent glucose uptake of muscle, insulin independent. So you don't even need insulin for the muscles to be taking. They love taking up glucose, taking up fat. So you can really eat like a lot more or even different kinds of foods and your body will be fine. Like if you have the muscle, and you're active and you're, sort of also earning the carbs and everything, which I know is another concept that we'll touch on. But just for a little controversial note here, I have to ask you what your opinion is on health at every size, which is a movement that has been growing. And I'm sure you've seen it, you're aware of it. So I'm sure you have an opinion on it.
What I think about health at every size is we have objective data to determine a health of an individual, and what does that mean? That means elevated levels of blood glucose, elevated levels of insulin, elevated levels of triglycerides, elevated levels of blood pressure readings. These are outcomes of health. These are markers of health. When an individual is told that it's health at every size, what is the objective data to support that? That would be my question. And my answer would be, if someone is obese or overweight, we have clear indications that that is unhealthy. That is from a medical perspective, from a non-emotional, from a perspective that is not disparaging or not positive. It's just, is your blood sugar within a regular range? Is your blood pressure well maintained? And that becomes critical to assess. Where I think the health at every size may be coming into play is it is in a way trying to swing the pendulum of, again, maybe judgment, perhaps. But I think we have to be really, really careful when we say health at every size, because what does that allow us to think? Does that allow us to believe that we know that overweight, obese individuals have a risk factor for diabetes, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's? What are the implications of that framework?
Yes, you bring up such a great point that it is about, alleviating the judgment, that people face, especially if they're struggling with being overweight. But it doesn't really, I think, serve most people to think that they can just pursue any kind of lifestyle and not be concerned about their size, not be concerned about those things, because like you said, we have these independent biomarkers that are so important. So I appreciate you sharing on that, because I know it is a definitely controversial topic, and it's a movement that just has been growing. So I think it's important to talk about it for sure.
It's surprising that it's somewhat controversial, because at the end of the day, it is our responsibility to make individuals resilient physically. It is our responsibility as either healthcare providers or educators that people are physically fit, resilient, and capable, not just for themselves, but for showing up as assets to their family. And there's only one way to get there. And the only way to get there is to put in work and to eat responsibly and to train responsibly. These are non-negotiables. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't have your cake or et cetera, whatever it is that someone loves. But the question becomes, typically those are earned things.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I love that you bring that up, that point that you can earn those carbs, like move your body, do good feeling activity and you can feel good about eating the cake, or you can feel good about eating the carbs because you've been doing that movement, you've been benefiting your body in so many other ways. Now, one of the topics I really wanted to touch on with you is intermittent fasting. It's a very popular approach that a lot of people like to follow, especially in our community. And it also kind of goes hand in hand with prioritizing protein. People tend to be more satiated and they tend to eat less frequently. But I think there is a little bit of a downside risk, especially to, consuming just one meal a day for a lot of people. There may be certain situations where people can just like maintain and be fine on that. But, understanding muscle protein synthesis through you and your mentor, Dr. Don Layman, has really influenced me in the last several years, especially to, change my fasting window, have 2 meals a day at a minimum. And that's, something that I feel is probably more beneficial. But what are your thoughts on OMAD?
Yeah, OMAD is not ideal. And the original studies, when this was first put into place, actually was quite a while ago. And it was out of a French group. I think it was Arnal et al. And they did protein pulsing, where they looked at, and I'm going to highlight kind of the background because I think it's important to understand where some of this came from. And Arnal et al., this French group, looked at protein pulsing in women. And what it looked at was these smaller dosing of protein throughout the day. Each group had 70 grams of protein, and one group had two 10-gram protein boluses and then one 50-gram bolus. That's kind of like OMAD. And then the other group did multiple boluses of 10 grams. What they found was that the one bolus of 50 grams actually improved 24-hour protein synthesis. That would support this, quote, 1 meal a day. However, we see that when you increase the feeding to a more robust protein bolus more than once a day, you have this impact on muscle protein synthesis rather than doing it one time a day. What does that mean? That means you get a greater 24-hour retention, nitrogen retention muscle. Overall 24-hour nitrogen retention, which is thought to have implications over time on the maintenance of lean tissue. Now, just to go a level deeper, when you think about OMAD, 1 meal a day, think about the normal patterning of humans. The standard American diet, according to the NHANES data set of how Americans pattern food, is a smaller breakfast meal of protein, 20 grams or less. Same thing with lunch, and then a big dinner with 60 grams of protein. Mm-hmm. That is what we have done, and that is what we are doing statistically right now. Look at what it has done to body composition. And again, I'm making pretty significant leaps here, and I'm acknowledging that just to frame the conversation. The significant leap that I'm making is I'm not saying anything about total calories, etc. But what we are talking about is the implications of that 1 meal a day. Why do we care about muscle protein synthesis? Muscle protein synthesis is a biological process that is the incorporation of amino acids. And it's what is considered a biomarker of muscle health. It is a biomarker of muscle health. The data supports that when we do not trigger muscle protein synthesis, over time, there is a loss of lean tissue. There's a loss of skeletal muscle mass. There's a potential loss of organ. There is an inability to replace these amino acids over time. Muscle protein synthesis obviously is targeted at muscle, but there is a 24-hour nitrogen retention, a 24-hour turnover that's it's constantly going on. So 1 meal a day is allowing you to do muscle protein synthesis one time, versus a better way to do it would be twice. That first meal and that last meal are most critical. The first and the last meal of the day are the two most critical meals. The reason is, the way I can justify this is all the data on muscle protein synthesis and meal feeding is targeted at the first meal of the day because it's easy. There are not other confounding variables. It is very clear that when you hit between 30 and 50 grams, you stimulate muscle protein synthesis. You're also coming out of an overnight fast. Your body is in a catabolic state. This is the time that muscle is primed. Hit that first meal of the day with 30 to 50 grams, depending on how many times you're feeding.
Yes. And I think a lot of people may be concerned that if they do have that first meal, that they're going to be ravenous all day, but protein is so incredibly satiating, and especially combined with, healthy fats. As long as you're not overdoing the carbs, then I've had the experience. I think a lot of people have the experience that you don't really think about food, until dinner time. And then even then, if you want to have a light lunch with like a small portion of protein or something like that, or do 3 meals, that's totally fine. If you're prioritizing the right macros, you're going to end up better, I think, with your body composition. I first started doing this because of the research I was looking at on leptin and the glucose control, that especially that I saw on research on women that's provided for like 24 hours if you have a protein meal with some healthy fats at breakfast at your first meal, instead of skipping it and going, all the way to dinner. But I still fast between breakfast and dinner and I feel great. Now, speaking of that, that amount of protein that you would want to have at breakfast, I want to talk to you a little bit about the nature of muscle protein synthesis. You talk in the book about it being binary. It's something I've talked with your mentor about as well. Some people believe that it is more of a dial, which, having personally worked with Dr. Alleyman, I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, because some people believe the research on it is not conclusive.
Here's what I would say to that. First, I want to circle back to the hunger component. And there's a handful of studies that they're so wonderfully done. And they were by former Doug Patton-Jones and Heather Leidy. What they showed was individuals, they did a gradation study. So they looked at 10, I want to say that they looked at 10, 15, it may have been 20, 10, we'll say 15, and then 30 grams of dietary protein. And every time they saw a much more robust influence on on hormones related to satiation, PYY and GLP-1, when you hit 30 grams. So I'm just going to say that. And they looked at it, what happened when they hit 10 grams and what happened when they looked at 15 to 20 grams. And remarkably, that 30-gram mark doesn't just affect muscle protein synthesis, but it also has a more robust impact on things like GLP-1 and peptide PYY, to signal satiation. The muscle protein synthesis is the standard, the gold standard right now. This is what we have. This is what we know. Synthesis is much easier to measure than breakdown. Mm-hmm. From my perspective, this idea that muscle protein synthesis is kind of a gray area, I would say that that's potentially not accurate, because we know that when you're not stimulating it, we have loss of lean tissue. We know that when you do stimulate, it does show retention over time. What I will say is that it's not a direct correlation. Muscle protein synthesis and then muscle accretion, it's not like you eat a meal and you build muscle. Remember, muscle protein synthesis is a metabolic process that we know is either happening or is not happening. And that would be kind of the perspective, I think, to take, and to understand that we know what happens when we don't stimulate it.
Right. And, I've talked as well with Dawn about the thermic effect of protein. Mm-hmm. And I really think it's fascinating that could be attributed to the ATP demands of muscle protein synthesis. So you really want to make sure to be hitting, that amount, getting that right amount, so that you will get the right amount of leucine in your blood, which is, I think Dr. Lehman found it to be 2.5 grams of leucine in the blood. Now, one of the questions I get the most frequently is for example, say that I think the messaging, especially that, you've been doing and, Dr. Lehman's been doing and some of your colleagues and, you know, myself included is like targeting around 30 grams of protein at a meal. And I know that you guys sort of look at like 30 to 55 grams. Like that's sort of where you're getting optimal. You've maxed out muscle protein synthesis. So people are eating twice a day and say they are trying to also get 1 gram of protein per pound of lean body mass or per pound of ideal body weight. And say that ends up being like 140 grams a day. But they were eating 2 meals a day and they're getting somewhere between 60 total to maybe 110 or 110 grams a day. Should they be concerned about that extra amount because they've already been hitting, the threshold to trigger muscle protein synthesis twice?
In the hierarchy of necessity of dietary protein, let's speak about it as the most important essential macronutrient. It is the most important essential macronutrient. Protein, carbohydrates, and fats. Carbohydrates and fats throughout, once you're an adult, doesn't change. The need doesn't change. Dietary protein, we speak about it as if it's one thing. It's 20 different amino acids, 9 of which are essential. Each of those essential amino acids are individual nutrients that do individual things. They're not replaceable. And I'm just teeing this up in the way that, for example, threonine is important for mucin production. Phenylalanine is important for dopamine production. Lysine is important for carnitine synthesis and fatty acid oxidation. Tryptophan for serotonin. I'm teeing this up because muscle protein synthesis, the needs of muscle protein synthesis, that's only one example of why we need dietary protein. It's the one example that when we hit it, we know we can hit it very specifically, and we know that it has a positive effect on muscle protein synthesis over time. So I'm going to tee that up there. To optimize that system, this muscle protein synthetic response, it is probably around 50 to 55 grams.
Right.
I love the idea of doing that twice a day. And I can acknowledge why and provide a good thought process as to why that would be beneficial. You still need protein for all the other things. You must meet the total needs of the body. That becomes critical. So if you optimize for those 2 meals, even if you go higher, you still utilize that protein. If you went 70 grams for 2 meals a day, I would be good with that. Because now you've maximized muscle protein synthesis, and the rest of that protein still has a place in metabolism, and each of those nutrients will be used for their secondary outcome.
So you'd rather people overshoot it a bit than
100%, because the 24-hour protein intake has to be right. Not just for muscle. The reason I focus on muscle is because when we hit the needs of skeletal muscle, then everything else can fall into place. Meaning, if you hit the 50, 55 grams, we know you've protected muscle. Everything else still has utilization, because you want to hit 0.7 to 1 gram per pound ideal body weight. You want to hit that amount. You want to hit that amount, not just for muscle. You want to hit that amount for overall protein turnover. You want to hit that amount for gut and neurotransmitter, other organ systems.
So you'd rather that people, if they're doing 2 meals a day, shoot for like 70 at each meal, or try to maybe add in a protein shake or something like that
in the middle. Yeah. And actually that is my longevity plan in the book.
Nice.
In the book Forever Strong, which is what Vanessa's talking about that she read, the longevity plan is the first and last meal are the most important, and we hit 50 grams. And then that middle meal is kind of arbitrary, but you use that middle meal to bring your protein up to where you want. But it's not necessary. You could easily do those 2 meals with higher amounts of protein.
I really love that response. And just as a quick little tangent on that, I'm really curious what your opinion is on the fact that the whole concept of non-essential amino acids is actually has no scientific basis. There's actually no research out there or scientific proof that there are some amino acids that are non-essential. Like,
Well, you need them all.
yeah,
And I think that the idea comes from, does the body generate it? But the body does need substrates to generate non-essential amino acids.
yeah.
But typically the body can make them. And some amino acids like glutamine will be semi-essential, which by the way, glutamine is considered a semi-essential amino acid depending on the stress in the body. For example, if you are in a highly catabolic state, you may need more glutamine. Glutamine is released from contracting skeletal muscle, which is fascinating. Glutamine is a fuel source for lymphocytes, cells of the immune system. This is one of the first early recognizing interfaces between skeletal muscle and the immune system. Contracting skeletal muscle releases glutamine. Glutamine feeds cells of the immune system.
That's so amazing to think about.
Not only that,
Thinking
contracting
about that all
skeletal
night.
not only that, contracting skeletal muscle releases myokines. Myokines are small molecules that they are released from contracting skeletal muscle. And there's over 600. For example, interleukin 6 is the most famous of all myokines, which is so interesting. Interleukin 6 is this myokine that is released from contracting skeletal muscle. And by the way, the time and intensity, the duration and intensity of the exercise affects the circulating levels of interleukin 6. So the longer and more intense you're exercising, the more interleukin 6 that you're going to release, making skeletal muscle like medicine. What does it do? It plays a role in balancing out inflammatory factors. For example, interleukin 6 released from macrophages is considered a cytokine, which we've heard about cytokine storms, has a pretty significant role in overall inflammation. Skeletal muscle interleukin 6 has somewhat of a dampening effect on inflammation. It also plays a pivotal role in glucose homeostasis, which is also very interesting and may also contribute to those that are inactive. You know, we talk about skeletal muscle. Okay, you ready for this? We talk about skeletal muscle as if just the contraction is the key, as if exercising skeletal muscle is a way to dispose of glucose. But what we fail to recognize in the picture of metabolic regulation and metabolic health. But one thing that we fail to recognize is that exercising skeletal muscle releases interleukin 6, which affects the way the liver utilizes lipolysis, which affects the way glucose is regulated. So one reason why people may get abnormal body composition and or abnormal insulin and glucose is because they're not releasing interleukin 6 from skeletal muscle.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. And so motivating, to go work out and make sure that it's a consistent practice. Now I love how you talk about protein, fat, and carbs in terms of dosing. It's like, that really is like the epitome of like muscle proteins. What did you call it in the book? Protein centric medicine, or not
Muscle centric medicine.
I don't mean that. There was a quote in the book where you said like, dosing protein is like the epitome is food as medicine. That's what it was. Now, why should people why should people keep in mind that there is a carb threshold per meal? We didn't actually cover that on the last episode. We actually covered myokines quite a bit. So I'm going to link our first interview in the show notes for anyone who wants to hear more about the myokines and adipokines. But we actually didn't talk about the mechanisms of the carb threshold. And I think it's a super important concept when it comes to, dosing your macros, especially at your first meal of the day, but also probably the others.
Yeah. The way that we have to think about carbohydrates is oftentimes, so for example, the average American eats 300 grams of carbohydrates a day. The RDA is around 130 grams of carbohydrates a day. Now, there is a way that we need to think about carbohydrates that is not just a 24-hour ingestion of carbohydrates. And here's why. Because when you go over 50 grams of carbohydrates in a sedentary person, you'll get a more robust release of insulin. Insulin is a peptide hormone that is released from the pancreas. The pancreas releases insulin. Insulin's job is to move blood glucose out of the bloodstream into the cells. Glucose at high levels is toxic. It is the definition of diabetes. We can measure that. That is how we test for diabetes. The reality is that how we dose carbohydrates also matter. For example, when you ingest a meal of 50 grams of carbohydrates, we can account for disposal. Some goes to muscle, some goes to brain, some goes to organ. And when you look at the calculations, one could say that in a 2-hour period, the body could be efficient at disposing of 50 grams of carbohydrates just based on what is being used. And of course, there's gluconeogenesis in terms of how much you're producing and how much room there is. But you could dispose of around 50 grams of carbohydrates when you are not exercising. Anything over that can increase insulin release and create a subsequent drop in blood sugar, which then releases counter-regulatory hormones. And you have this ebb and flow in blood sugar, and you begin to chase your blood sugar. Not only do you feel tired, do you feel potentially it puts you at risk for cravings, but this is not an ideal pattern of eating. A better way to think about carbohydrates is understanding how much you're going to start with. If you are metabolically healthy, number one, you should track. You should track to see how many carbohydrates you're eating in a day. But you also should calculate how many you need. And again, you can go through the book and calculate, you start with protein, then you calculate carbohydrates, and then you calculate fat. But how you leverage carbohydrates is important. So if you want to go over 50 grams of carbohydrates per meal, you better be exercising.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you have no business doing that.
Yeah, it's such a good point and so helpful to think of it per meal, because a lot of times those glucose spikes, that end up making your blood glucose go lower than where you started, that's what makes you, like you said, chase your glucose, feel hungry an hour after or 2 hours after you just had, a lot of calories because you've spiked your blood glucose. But if you try to stay within that target amount, I think that's such a helpful tool for people. When it comes to fats, what are your thoughts? I know Dawn has said that the body has actually quite a small requirement for essential fats.
Just about, small. The actual requirement is just a couple grams of essential fatty acids. I don't really think, I think that the way you have to think about fats is prioritize omega-3 fatty acids. When you're eating a healthy diet, you will get the rest, monounsaturated fatty acids. I don't think that it needs to be a focal point.
Yeah.
I don't think that it needs to be a focal point.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you are getting more of your energy from fats and like restricting carbohydrates, to maybe under 50 or under 40 a day, then you're probably going to be consuming more, but just depends on, lifestyle choice at the end of the day. And I love how you embrace that. Like, as long as you prioritize protein, choose how you get your carbohydrates or your hydrocarbons, it's whatever mix, that works for you.
Yeah.
And also depending on how active you are versus sedentary. So last time around, I asked you for your opinion on gluconeogenesis being quote unquote stressful for the body. And you said basically, no, it's not stressful. It's just a physiological response, which I also agree with. Have you had any new thoughts on gluconeogenesis? It's one of those very hotly debated topics in the space, and never ending, whether it is supply driven or demand driven. I, have shifted my opinion on it to be more so, supply driven. I used to really think it was demand driven, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
I would agree with you. I think it's largely supply driven. Gluconeogenesis is the generation of glucose. Typically, when you have dietary protein, if you eat 100 grams, 60 grams, potentially will go through this process of gluconeogenesis. I would agree with you. And Don and I have spoken about it. He had a great paper. I'm sure that he sent it over to you about the percentages, but I do think that it is largely supply driven versus demand driven.
I want to shift into our last topic, which is women around perimenopause or postmenopause. There are different requirements for women at different stages, and obviously our hormone levels change quite a bit when we get to those stages in life. So what
Mhm.
do you want women who are in perimenopause or even menopause to know about, that sort of those lower hormone levels and how that's going to affect body composition and what they need to really focus on during those stages?
Great question. And I think this is what my next book is going to actually be upon. It's
Oh,
going to be on
amazing.
women. It's also going to be
That's perfect.
pre-pregnancy, postpartum, perimenopause, and menopause. Let's define perimenopause. Perimenopause is defined as any time in your life which you are approaching, quote, menopause. And perimenopause could start at 35 and go to 50, right? So it is the time before, right before, quote, menopause. And menopause is defined as this 12 months without a period. Now, think about this. It's not that for any woman listening, it's not that all of a sudden you just stop having your period and then you're in menopause. It's usually this process of increasing FSH, lower levels of estrogens, lower levels of progesterone, the balance between testosterone changes. It's a whole experience. And this is also the time. So perimenopause can start anytime, 35, anytime. Well, not anytime. You really, unless there is some pathological process that's happening, premature ovarian failure. But perimenopause, this is the time. Let's say that this is the time where you're starting to have irregular periods. Let's just call this 40 years old. Again, I'm just picking a number that you are around perimenopause. You will see somewhat of an erratic pattern of hormones. 1 month, everything is normal. The next month, it's a little bit of a moving target. This is also leading up to the time of menopause. Menopause is, again, the cessation of a menstrual cycle for 12 months. This is the critical time when women are affected from a body composition standpoint. This is the time we see a rapid loss in skeletal muscle mass. We see a decrease in bone density. This is the time, and it doesn't have to be that way. You can impact body composition changes without hormonal therapy by getting your nutrition and your exercise right. This is the time where a lot of women who have traditionally exercised do a lot of zone 2 cardio. You go into any gym and you see the majority of women are occupying the treadmills. Ladies, you are not going to get bulky. The most important piece of advice I could give you is to begin resistance training. Begin resistance training, obviously the earlier the better, but if you can start around perimenopause, if you haven't done anything yet, start now. Start 3 days a week, 10 sets, just for a basic recommendation, 10 sets per muscle group a week. I do suggest that if you're starting out, there has to be this mind-muscle connection where you are thinking about training. I do prefer women begin to lift heavier weights. There isn't evidence to support that as it relates to hypertrophy in this way, right? So there was this traditional hypertrophy conversation where the loading recommendations for strength would be 1 to 5 rep max, 8 to 12 of your 8 to 12 reps, 1 to 5 reps, 8 to 12, and then endurance would be 15 plus. The modality will definitely impact some of the molecular signaling. However, when you are thinking about what is the overall outcome, the goal is not to go in and just exercise. The goal is maintaining and building skeletal mass. it becomes very important that while you can, you focus your attention on hypertrophy and strength. The reason is because once you are fully in menopause and you do not have hormone replacement like testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone, you rely on your diet and your training. And for women that are in menopause, 1 gram per pound, ideal body weight, I don't like going lower than that. If you are younger, you can go a little bit lower, whether it's 0.7, you could go even a little bit lower, but a more optimal range is about 0.7 to 1 gram. But women who are in menopause, going through that perimenopause to menopause and older, 1 gram per pound, ideal body weight, you guys have to get this right. And the dosing matters. Really thinking about that 30 to 50 gram dosing is important. And then resistance training is the non-negotiable.
I love that. So what are your thoughts on HRT, hormone replacement therapy for women to, support their body composition during those stages?
First of all, as a physician, if a patient is a candidate and wants to do hormone replacement therapy, I've seen a tremendous amount of benefit, not just from skeletal muscle body composition, because hormone replacement is not considered the treatment for body composition. You don't just take hormones and then all of a sudden your body composition is amazing. You can leverage hormones and also have an appropriate lifestyle that supports a muscle-centric lifestyle. If you're a candidate for hormone replacement therapy, it certainly makes the transition easier, but it also is brain, bone, muscle, and cardiovascularly protective. I am all for it. If you are a candidate, I am absolutely all for it.
And what's the way to do it properly and sort of mitigate risks, that we've seen associated with it, like breast cancer in the past? And I think those were mostly with synthetic hormones.
I think that there has been a lot of issues with the hormone replacement narrative. Collectively, I would say we're moving into an era where we're all starting to see the benefits versus the risks. I think that there are some pretty big flaws with the traditional research that we're beginning to believe and do believe that the benefits greatly outweigh the risks. Just hasn't been moved to the standard of care yet because it takes a long time for medicine, but I believe it will be. Just as I believe that testosterone replacement therapy will be moved into as the standard of care for aging in general. And then the other part of your question, what was the other part?
Yeah, so I guess the next question is, what is your opinion on rapamycin and people using that to delay the onset of menopause? There seems to be a lot of rhetoric out there now saying that if you delay, the more you can delay menopause, the more positive impact it has on longevity. So,
I don't know if I have much of a opinion on rapamycin yet because I'm not prescribing it right now. And yeah, I'm not sure yet.
Yeah,
and I will also say that we have to accept the fact that we age.
Right.
And we are doing all of these things that potentially push the needle, but the reality is we all age. So I'll just kind of throw that out there, that we do have to put certain things into perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, that totally makes sense. So your book is absolutely phenomenal. I was telling you before we started that I was so moved by it in so many ways, especially some of the inspirational stories in it. And, one of them that stood out to me the most was about your patient who I can't recall his name in this moment, but he had lost his leg. And
Brian.
he came in to see Brian, and he came in to see you, and you were like, how are you gonna deal with this? And his reply had like nothing to do with the fact that he lost his leg. He was just like, he had like already moved past that. I love how you talk about mindset in the book, in addition to all the incredible research, data, and information that you share. But that mindset piece really blew me away, and I think really elevated the book even more so to the next level. I love that you incorporated stories like that. And the fact is you are a physician, you work with people. So you have like real life stories and examples for people. That's just so inspirational.
Vanessa, first of all, I appreciate that recognition. I've been a physician since 2006, and I say this often, but a good clinician recognizes patterns of disease. That's what you're trained to do. An effective physician recognizes patterns of people. And that is the actual art of medicine. You can give someone the perfect plan, the perfect program. But if you are not exquisitely aware of who that person is and leverage that person to get the best out of themselves, to remove obstacles, to take action, and or understand the underpinning of that person, it will be as if that person is on a hamster wheel over and over and over again. Brian was an aha moment. And for those of you guys who have not read the book, I take care of the most amazing human beings on the planet. I am still in clinical practice. A portion of my practice is dedicated to the elite warfighter. And Brian had been in the SEAL teams for 20 years. He was a breacher, been to some of the most dangerous places in the world, and he had never been injured. For those of you who don't know what a breacher is the muscle of the teams. He was 250 pounds, a tree trunk of a man, Texan, whose job was to go first and blow up doors and to get soldiers through. Never injured. It's probably one of the most dangerous jobs in the SEAL teams. And he was home on friendly soil going 5 miles an hour on his motorcycle. He was living in Nevada at the time. And a 17-year-old girl texting and driving completely took Brian out. Brian lost his leg that day. And he was in my office. And I'm thinking to myself, man, I'm really going to find out how he's doing. He's not going to open up to anyone, but he's going to open up to me because I'm the 5'1", 110-pound doctor, mama bear to these guys. I'm going to really get to the underbelly. Sitting in my office, cap on, flannel shirt, Solomon's, jeans, standard team guy outfit. And I look at him and I say, Brian, I lean in. I said, how are you doing? Pretty dramatic in that way. And he answers me, he looks at me and he said, well, doc, I'm having some phantom limb pain and I don't have as much energy as I used to. But other than that, I'm okay. And I had this whole story in my mind about he's never going to be the same. His life is over. Here he is, this alpha guy. He's never going to be able to support his country. I just went on this whole litany of reasons as to why his life was over. All this in my mind, right? I'm having this conversation. And I leaned in again and I go, no. Brian, you got to tell me, how are you really doing? And he looked at me like I had just asked him about why there was a man dressed as a Twinkie in a tutu with 5, elephants on a leash. He looked at me completely in bewilderment. I mean, the guy was so confused, like, why are you asking me these? I just answered you. And he looked at me and he goes, oh, doc, you mean my leg? And I'm like, yeah, dude. He said, no. That was like 6 months ago. And that was an aha moment for me because I realized that the difference between how someone becomes an asset to their own life, to their kids, to their significant other, to their community, to their workplace, versus what makes someone a liability has to do with how they process information. Most people haven't even gotten over things that happened 6 years ago. They're still carrying baggage. And the most successful individuals in life, and it doesn't have to be monetary, it can be in health, can be in whatever it is, in whatever domain that you are functioning, is a short-term memory for bad things. A short-term memory for bad things, and a neutral mindset about it. He had gotten off the X. He'd moved on to execute, and he wasn't telling himself a whole big story about it. And it, the listener might think, well, I'm not a Navy SEAL, etc. Well, I'm not either. And I learned from it. And then I started to tie together what were some of the consistent things and attributes and characteristics that I was seeing over time in those individuals that were happy, that were healthy, that were able to commit to their plan. And that was one of the cornerstones.
It moved me to tears, and I like feel like I'm going to start crying again because it was such an inspirational story. And, that's something I truly love about you, how much you really, really deeply care about people and your patients, and that you see strength in other people. And, I know this is a little bit off topic, but I just have to hear you say this on the podcast. What advice do you have out there for parents of young boys? Because I can't help but think about how you create a strong man and how you raise a strong man, because I think we're living in a time when things are kind of against men. And, the pendulum has swung a little bit too far, I think, in the other direction. So I know it's a little off topic, but I'd love to hear your advice for that.
First of all, in all fairness, I am married to a former Navy SEAL, and my son's name is Leonidas, King of the Spartans, and he's 2.5. And I have a daughter whose name is Aries Hunter. And we have foundational principles that we have within our family. We believe in being physically fit. We believe in being respectful. I tell them and to repeat 5 things every day to me. Are you ready? I am strong. I am kind. I am courageous. I am worthy. And I am loved. My 2.5-year-old will tell you that. As rough as the world is out there, we can program our children to be strong and capable and leaders of humanity.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. I'm definitely going to implement that. And you're such an inspiring human. You wrote such an incredible book. Aside from getting your book and giving it to everyone that I know, what can we do as a community, listeners listening right now? What can we do to help move the needle? The work that you're pioneering and doing, the work that, you're trying to do, and some of your, peers are doing as well, really successfully, effectively right now. But what can we all do to move the needle towards this greater understanding and shifting, the space towards muscle-centric medicine?
I have never asked for anything. I've never asked for anything of the followers. I've never asked for anything from my community or your community. And I'm going to do something I've never done. I'm going to do an ask. And the ask is that you guys go out and purchase this book, and you do not wait, and you do it today. And here is why. This message, this book is so much bigger than me as an individual. It is so much bigger than Vanessa as an individual. If we can get enough orders of this book will make it to the New York Times bestseller list. If that happens, it puts it on the map. The mission of muscle, changing the narrative of health and wellness, becomes a forerunner versus constantly trying to lose body fat, still having this obesity discussion. I need you guys to go out and purchase this book. Purchase this book because this mission is so important. And do not wait, and do it today, because again, we are recording this on a Saturday. We have 1 week to bring this to the bestseller list. 1 week. Those orders close on Saturday, which is Saturday the 21st. You can still purchase the book. But again, the goal is, as a community, as a mission, we have to move this forward.
Yes. And I feel your passion. It's tangible. I know our listeners can as well. This is becoming my new Bible on protein and body recomposition. And it is everything that I expected to be, but so much more. Congratulations on writing it. Of course, I will link it in the show notes for everyone to get their copy of Forever Strong. And what is the last thing you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
I just really appreciate you hanging in there and listening to this. And I know I speak for myself and Vanessa. Your support means everything. So thank you.
Yes. Oh, that's beautiful. Well, Gabrielle, Dr. Lyon, thank you so much for making the time on this Saturday to be here
Of
with
course.
us. I really loved the conversation. I'm so proud of everything that you're doing. I'm just amazed
Thank
and in
you.
awe of you. And you're absolutely killing it. So keep on killing it. And everyone, where can everyone follow you? If they don't
Yeah.
already, they probably do. But if they don't already,
Yeah. So you can go to my IG. That's Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. I have a podcast called The Dr. Gabrielle Lyon Show. You can go to my website at drgabriellelyon.com. You can find everything. You can sign up for our newsletter. I even have a 30G newsletter. Vanessa, we should collaborate on a 30-gram protein recipe. So we
that
should
would be
do that.
fun.
And a
Yeah.
regular newsletter. And of course, Twitter and all the other places.
Awesome. Well, yeah, your podcast is in my top 5. It's one of my favorites. You have to go subscribe and listen. And yeah, thank you so much again for being here.
Thanks, Vanessa.
All right, my friends, I hope that you enjoyed today's episode with my dear friend, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. I enjoyed our conversation so much, talking about everything from intermittent fasting to the carb threshold per meal, HRT, hormone replacement therapy, rapamycin to delay the onset of menopause, and even how to raise strong men. We just got to talk about so many incredible topics, including mindset and so much more. You have to go out and get this book, Forever Strong. It is my new favorite book when it comes to protein nutrition, overall wellness and health. And it is also such a joy to read, so inspirational. I enjoyed reading every page. So go and check out the book. I will link it in the show notes for you all here if you would like to check it out. And I can't wait to hear your thoughts on it. Let's chat more about these concepts in our Facebook group at the Optimal Protein Podcast group on Facebook. Now, we talked about protein a lot in this episode, and some of you know I am about to release my protein, which is Tone Protein. If you'd like to be the first to know when it is available to order and also get the exclusive launch discount, please go to toneprotein.com. You can sign up there with your name and email address, and you'll be the first to know when it is available to order. I have scientifically formulated this protein to be the most efficient way to help you build muscle, initiate muscle protein synthesis, and it also is absolutely delicious. So I use it every single day and I love it. I can't wait to hear how much you love it too. And that'll be launching very soon in the next couple of months. So do sign up at toneprotein.com. And if you'd like to also find out when the new second generation of the Tone device is going to be launching, you actually can pre-order it now if you go to ketogenicgirl.com. But if you sign up for the list at tonedevice.com, you will know when it is officially shipping out, and also get access to exclusive specials, giveaways. I'm going to be doing lots of giveaways for the new second generation of the Tone device and also for Tone Protein. So if you are on those email lists, you will stay informed on all the updates and also be the first to know about exclusive deals, special promotions, and giveaways on both of those. So that's again, tonedevice.com and toneprotein.com. I appreciate you all so much for being here. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen today. And I am sending you all so much love. Until the next episode, I am wishing you a fat-fueled rest of your day. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.